shortly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, Carlos.
I just,
Very good.
okay, thanks.
Carlos, before we start, is the June 2nd webinar still happening? With many
I
changes?
believe so. Yes, as far as I know, yes.
Okay, we're going to announce it and then we'll talk afterwards because the registration is full and there's a way to expand that.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're starting, so I'll be quiet.
My live stream froze.
And very quickly, from the Sanctionskill site, there's a donate button on the top, which
Yes.
is easy, should
No,
be mentioned
no.
because it's easier than trying to copy down that long URL.
Carlos is on.
Yes.
Hello there.
How are you? Good to see you, everybody.
I just want to remind everybody that we're live right now, and so we should probably be muted as we wait to get started. And for those who have joined the call, our attendees, we want to thank you for joining us, and we encourage you to share in the chat where you're joining from. It's always exciting to see. We see people are already starting to do that. Welcome, Barry from Scotland, and I think that's South Africa. And so please, yeah, Cape Town, great, thank you. Medea from Miami. So we encourage you to do that in the few minutes while we're waiting to get started.
And if all the speakers could mute except for the ones that will be starting, that would be great.
Joe, I got his picture. You can hear, I can hear you.
Yes,
Bailey,
we're
if you go
live.
to your profile on Zoom, and it will ask you for your picture on profile. If you substitute your picture for his picture, then that's what will show.
Okay, let me see. Download.
Isn't it go to start video?
We're live, please. No crosstalk.
Welcome to those who've joined the call. As you can see people doing in the chat, we encourage people to write in the chat where they're from. It's always exciting to see the breadth of where people are joining this webinar.
Let me. Okay, Joe, I changed the picture.
So it's 4 minutes after. I think it would be a good time to start, folks. We have lots of people viewing already.
Okay, so I'm ready to roll.
Yes.
Okay, very good, thanks. Greetings, and thank you for joining us. I'm Margaret Kimberly. I'm the editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report and an administrative committee member of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC. UNAC is a sponsor of this Sanctionskill webinar, along with Popular Resistance, Black Alliance for Peace, the International Action Center, the December 12th Movement, Code Pink, the U.S. Peace Council, the International League of People's Struggles, No Dutal for Korean Community Development, and IFCO Pastors for Peace, among others. This week, our discussion takes on a new level of importance. The world witnessed the brutal killing of George Floyd by a policeman in Minneapolis, Minnesota in the US. There is a direct connection between state aggression carried out internationally and domestically. The US has the biggest military in the world, 800 foreign bases, the largest number of incarcerated people in the world, and 1,000 killings carried out by police every year. The same self-declared right to carry out invasions, proxy wars, and as we'll discuss today, sanctions as an act of war result in human rights violations against people in this country too. It is impossible to have injustice abroad while expecting to have justice at home. Just as thousands of people are publicly expressing outrage at Mr. Floyd's murder, today we are expressing our opposition to the continued violations of human rights and international law that are an integral part of the sanctions regime. Today, we are joined by representatives from Palestine, Yemen, Venezuela, and Iran, who will speak to the impact that sanctions, unilateral coercive measures, are having on their people. I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Margaret Flowers. Margaret Flowers is a pediatrician. She is co-director of Popular Resistance, co-host of Clearing the Fog Radio, and a co-founder of the Embassy Protection Collective. Hello, Margaret, welcome.
Thank you, Margaret. And I want to welcome everybody to the call today, our esteemed speakers and our audience and our introducers and organizers. This is the second in a series of webinars on the US's illegal unilateral coercive measures. And you can watch the first one on our website, sanctionskill.org. You'll also find lots of resources there and a way to sign up to get more information. The goals of these webinars are both educational and to promote greater solidarity among impacted countries and among activists with those countries. As citizens of the United States Empire, we have a particular responsibility to build a movement that opposes the US's illegal and aggressive actions against people of other countries. I want to reiterate the point that Margaret made. We must understand that what we are facing domestically is related to the US's behavior abroad. A country that will impose more sanctions and more military threats at a time of crisis when countries around the world are coming together to address those crises is also a country that is more prepared to wage war against its own people than it is to protect them from a pandemic and economic collapse. But there is a bright spot recently that both Iran and Venezuela refused to back down in the face of US threats to block the 5 Iranian oil tankers bringing oil and supplies to Venezuela. We hope this is one of many efforts by countries to reject the US's illegal measures and work together to defy them, as we must all work together to stop these crimes against humanity and build a world based on cooperation, fulfillment of human rights, and protection of the planet. We will have 2 rounds of speaking today, and we'll also share with you what people can do. I'm going to ask that out of respect for our speakers, please avoid commenting while they are speaking. We'll ask our speakers today to begin by addressing the threats made by the United States and its allies, the impact those threats are having and on the well-being of their country, and how they are responding. I'll first introduce Pippa Bartolotti, who will introduce our first speaker. Pippa is a longtime peace and justice campaigner. She's been a leader of the Wales Green Party, an energetic human rights activist and climate change campaigner with groups such as Extinction Rebellion and she's driven a convoy of humanitarian aid across Europe to Gaza. She's been imprisoned in Israel while on her way to the West Bank and has lived for extended spells in Cuba. Pippa, you may now have the floor.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you and welcome to all our participants and our speakers. As Margaret just said, I did go to Gaza. I'm one of the few people who have spent just a little bit of time there. I understand more from that short visit about the oppression and the cruelty and the brutality that is daily carried out upon the people of Gaza. It doesn't always reach our mainstream news. And when it does, it's often propagandized to the point where it doesn't make proper sense. But today is the anniversary of the shooting of unarmed human rights activists on the Mavi Marmara. The Mavi Marmara was a boat that set sail from Turkey to try to break the blockade of Gaza. Few of us understand what a blockade really means in humanitarian terms, but they set out to do this. They were stopped by weaponized Israeli helicopters. Israeli soldiers were lowered down onto the decks of this simple boat, and 10 people were killed in cold blood, unarmed people. I have visited their grave sites in Turkey and around the Middle East. These were young, unarmed people. I have spoken with the skipper of the Mavi Marmara, and his story with his 18-month-old child on board is horrendous. This is an anniversary we would do well to remember because it encapsulates both the ferocity of the blockade on Gaza and the depth of the brutality the Israeli government is prepared to go to in order to keep these people from their natural human rights. It is my huge pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. Medhat Abbas. Dr. Medhat has been the Director General of Primary Healthcare in Gaza. He has led 2 hospitals, the Shifa and the El Asker. He spent time in the Ministry of Health in the International Relations Department and has extensive experience in health services management. Dr. Medhat Abbas is at the forefront of the provision of community health services and the management of the COVID-19 response, which, as you can imagine, with few medicines and practically no equipment, is extremely difficult. Thank you very much for joining us, Dr. Medhat. I will hand over to you now.
Thank you so much, Pippa. Thank you for everybody for calling me for this very nice webinar. And I think what you've been introducing is touching the reality. It reminds me, one day I was in Shifa Hospital. I was the director of that hospital, and the F-16 was there. That's American-made aircraft. And it attacked one of the civilian locations. Of course, the pilot was Israeli, of course, but the weapon was American. And I remember that I was in the reception of the hospital in the emergency room, and there was a child of almost 10 years old. That child, when he arrived, he was only half a child. His lower half was not there. Only the trunk and the head were there. Of course, he was killed. And I saw him, and everybody was running, and suddenly the people were just shouting because his father arrived. After the boy, he arrived with almost 10 minutes. He was just running, and I was standing near the child, near the body of the child. And when the father saw his child like that, he said, "My son!" And he started to cry. All of us started to cry. That was what was given by the United States to Israel to kill our children. I'll never ever forget that scene. I saw many people killed. I saw many children in that hospital. And believe me, we have passed since the 2008 2012, 2014, 3 wars, and then 3 of them were followed by the Great March of Return. We saw many children killed by cold blood. I mean, the weapons that are given by the United States to Israel are used to kill civilians and to impose a very bad siege, which has been extending for 13 years on our people in Gaza Strip. You know, Gaza Strip is a very tiny strip of land. It's an enclave on the Mediterranean Sea. It's inhabited by 2 million Palestinians trapped inside 360 kilometers square. You know, we are not free to travel like any other country in the world. We're not free to invite a friend to come to visit us. That can never happen. It's very complicated, very difficult. We have no electricity most of the time in Gaza Strip. We have no enough potable water to drink. It's a very bad siege imposed. Unfortunately, the Israelis are supported by the United States in every decision they make, in every step where they are anticipating to keep punishing the Palestinian community. We are suffering. I work in the Ministry of Health now for almost 6 years without my salary. We take stipend of money of only 40%, which is not enough to feed or to educate our children. The poverty is prevailing and the unemployment is prevailing in Gaza Strip. And 80% of our people today are depending on humanitarian aids and free food tickets distributed from humanitarian organizations. Imagine this very hard, complicated situation was followed by the corona, and this pandemic is something that we have never ever seen and imagined before. And it is coming on a time where the poverty is prevailing and we almost have no resources in Gaza Strip, because it needs a lot of equipment, a lot of personal protective equipment, masks and alcohol gel, everything. Imagine that a man who cannot buy bread for his children, you ask him to buy alcohol gel and to take care of his social distancing. I mean, he lost his hope of life because of the siege, which is still ongoing. Today, we are facing corona in Gaza. We have 61 positive cases registered. Thank goodness we have done a quarantine. We are imposing mandatory quarantine for everybody returning back to Gaza. And we have been able to catch every case, to diagnose every positive case before communicating with the people inside the Gazan community. And we have isolated all of them now. But nobody knows at what time this virus is going to get inside. It's unfair to have a siege which is imposed for 13 years with corona at the same time. And we have been appealing for everybody in the international community. Stop the siege on civilians of Gaza Strip. It's enough. The people are dying. We have no harbor like any other country in the world. We have no airport. We have nothing in Gaza. And the people now, because of losing this hope, they have nothing. They don't know what to do. Too much people have left the country outside. They tried to make some money in order to spend for their children, but the situation is very hard, complicated, and it's much worse today with this corona. And because of this poor situation, we have no even medicine enough to treat the patients in Palestine. In the Ministry of Health, almost 40% of the drugs needed to treat the patients are not existing, and almost 50% of the medical supplies also are not existing in the stores of the Ministry of Health. Imagine that we cannot travel outside to attend conferences when somebody is inviting me to go to a conference outside. It's a very complicated, long journey that if you can make it outside, it's a very complicated to return back again to Gaza. We are in a prison. It is called the biggest open prison in the entire world today. It's called Gaza Strip. And I think, I hope through this webinar that everybody of you just advocate our case, because we love peace. We love the United States. We love Americans. We love every country in the world who can support peace. We are not against anybody. Just all we want to live in peace in our country. Just nothing more. We have just request nothing except living in dignity and having a good future for our children, which we are missing today. And believe me, the American drones are in the sky of Gaza Strip 24 hours every day. When we hear that, we don't know at what time they will decide to attack somebody. You don't know this body is going to be your relative, is going to be your son. You don't know. We know nothing. We have done nothing except just expecting the words coming from the sky, from the Navy, and from the cannons. I'll never, ever forget that day when I was in Al-Aqsa hospital. I was there And somebody told me, hey, doctor, there is nobody left in this building except you and your secretary. Everybody ran away. I said, what happened? He said, the Israelis are attacking strongly, and the heavy artillery bombardment are just shelling continuously. And I said, okay. I tried to get outside to find some doctors because everybody was scared to come outside their homes. 15 doctors were absent that day. And I took the ambulance. I moved from that hospital to another city, which is called Gaza City. And when I reached Gaza City, everybody who saw me said, oh, congratulations, Dr. Medhat, you are still alive. And I said, what happened? They attacked that hospital. They killed 3 of my colleagues, and almost 50 were wounded. And everybody was thinking that the hospital is safe. It should be protected by all the international community, by all the international law, by all the humanitarian issues. But, you know, we have no way to be protected in Gaza Strip. Everybody is under fire. Everybody is living under siege. Everybody is suffering and in pain, and there is no solution. We have been appealing and appealing, but it seems there is no response. Please, today, my message to all of you, if you can help us, just advocate the Palestinian case. Advocate that 2 million people are trapped inside a large prison. This siege is not valid, is not humanitarian. It's enough. They are dealing with the people here as we are just not humans. That's not fair. That's not accepted. And what I hope today is that you advocate, because the United States are giving too much weapons, too much support to the Israelis in a time where we are not deprived of food for our children in Gaza Strip. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas, for those very powerful words and for reminding us the importance of continuing our efforts to advocate for the Palestinian people and to stop the U.S. from financing the Israeli government. We'll now move on to our next speaker, who is calling from Yemen, and we're doing that with the assistance of Mohammed Azad of the U.S. Peace Council, who is helping him to connect to us today. But he'll be introduced by Asantua and Krumetura. Let me introduce Asantua. She is an active dues-paying member of the Black Alliance for Peace, an organization of individuals and organizations that unapologetically seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. Asantua has been an active dues-paying member of a political organization for the past 40 years, and she's a feminist, a socialist, and a Pan-Africanist. Asantua, please, I turn the floor over to you.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Very good, very good. Thanks to all the organizers who put this together, and thanks for our distinguished panelists. Again, my name is Asantua Nkrumah, and I have the pleasure to be introducing Dr. Yahyia Mohammed Saleh Murshed. Dr. Saleh Murshed is a professor of English, Arabic, Comparative Linguistics at Sana'a University. He teaches comparative linguistics and translation at Sana'a University and also at some private universities. He is also a member of the Union of Arabian Academics. So I present to you now Dr. Yahyia Mohammed Saleh Murshed.
Yes. Hello. Good evening. Thank you so much for having me participating in this conference. I am, as far as war is concerned, as far as war in Yemen is concerned, I am going to talk about 2 perspectives. The catastrophic consequences of this war led by Saudi Arabia and its coalition, and then the USA support, logistics support, and intelligence support. The first point is that the catastrophic, the disastrous consequences that this war caused to Yemeni. Okay, actually, Saudi Arabia has been destroying Yemen and Yemeni's life. It has been destroying schools, hospitals, mosques, historical castles, historical buildings, and so it has. Saudi Arabia has been killing Yemeni in the innocent people in schools, at everywhere. It has caused a miserable life to Yemenis. Most of the Yemenis are starving of hunger. Most of the Yemenis are dying of diseases. Most of the Yemenis are suffering so much in their life, in their education, and our students are out of school because teachers haven't received wages for 3 or 4 years. Okay, teachers at the university haven't received their salaries because of the economical and educational sanctions imposed by this damn system of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has killed a lot of people. Maybe the statistic says that about 200,000 people have been killed because of this Saudi Arabia system. Saudi Arabia has attacked weddings at home. Saudi Arabia has killed groms and bridegrooms in Yemen and Al-Bayda Governorate and Taz Governorate and Al-Makhasi board has killed a lot of people deliberately, and she knows that these people are innocent. They don't have anything to do with this civil war. Saudi Arabia has been interfering in Yemeni situation, and it makes it worse and worse and worse than we might have solved our local problem if Saudi Arabia hadn't intervened in our situation in Yemen. Saudi Arabia has caused us miserable life. We are suffering here. In Yemen, we are suffering from so many things caused by this stupid system. This system is supported by the USA. Okay, you know the war in Yemen, the war has been announced from where? From Washington. Okay, the Minister of Exterior has announced Yemeni war from Washington. What does it mean? What does it mean that when it's announcing war against another independent country from another capital of and from outside? It means that it's the USA war. Okay. USA is supporting Saudi Arabia system logistically and intelligence, and it provides Saudi Arabia with information. It provides Saudi Arabia with jet fighters, with F-16, F-18, and F-32 jet fighters. Okay, it provides Saudi Arabia with jet fighters carriers in the Red Sea and in the Arab Sea. There are a lot of jet fighters carriers in the Red Sea and in the Arab Sea. Okay, so the USA provides Saudi Arabia with missiles, with ballistic missiles. So the USA provides Saudi Arabia with thousands and thousands of bombs, which Saudi Arabia has dropped on Yemeni innocent people. Okay. Saudi Arabia uses all kinds of USA weapons. It uses cruise and tomahawk missiles, including what we call, as Mr. Trump has called it, the mother of bombs. Saudi Arabia had experienced this kind of bomb on the mountains of around Sana. It had dropped two bombs of this kind. Okay, it has destroyed a lot of houses, a lot of buildings in Sana'a of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia uses chemical and USA chemical weapons in Sana'a, in Al-Mahwouz governorate, and some other Yemeni governorate. We are suffering in the health sector. We are suffering too. We lack a lot of medical supplements because of this economical and economical sanction. We are Yemenis. We are separated. We are isolated from the other parts of the. We are in a severe sanction because of this stupid system of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is nothing, okay, but for USA logistics and intelligence support. USA devotes all kinds of satellites to give Saudi Arabia information about war and war in Yemen. Now we are coronavirus has spread out in Yemen. We are suffering so much of because we don't have any kind of medicine. We don't have any kind of medicine to cure the patients. Okay, when the patients are taken to the hospitals don't have any kind of medical supplement to resist this pandemic. Why? Because of this economical, health, educational sanctions, educational blockade imposed by this system. We are teachers of public universities and schools haven't received any salaries for 4 years. Okay, we are working, we are teaching at schools, at universities without any wages, without any salaries, because of this economical and educational sanctions imposed by it's not Saudi Arabia. It's the USA who support this system. This war in Yemen is aggressive. War in Yemen is aggressive. War in Yemen is unjustifiable at all. War in Yemen is unjustifiable. Okay, Saudi Arabia plans to wage war on Yemen and against Yemen for a long time. It's not just as a result of 2015. It has prepared and planned for this opposition, for this aggressive war against Yemeni for ages and ages. It's not just a recent scenario. It has been religiously prepared by USA and Saudi Arabia to wage war against Yemen. Saudi Arabia has its own publicity, has its own aims to wage this unjust war against Yemenis. Are bold, are very bold. Yemenis are very, very gifted people because of the political conflict before and because of this war waged by this system, I mean, Saudi system. Thank you. Yes. Hello?
Thank you, Dr. Saleh Murshed, for sharing that with us and reminding us about the long-time war on Yemen, the impact of Saudi Arabia's bombs, the impact of the United States aid for Saudi Arabia, and the sanctions and blockade that are preventing Yemenis from having access to medicines and other basic necessities. And we need to continue to remind ourselves that this is going on and work to end U.S. and Saudi Arabia's involvement. What we'll try to do is to email people some information about what Dr. Saleh Murshed shared. But let's next move on to our next speaker, and our next country represented is North Korea, or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And to introduce our speaker is Jae-yoon Ri. Jae-yoon is a first-generation immigrant living in the metropolitan area of New York City. She volunteers and is a member of Notatol for Korean Community Development and is a board member of the Korea Policy Institute. She organized and led a number of delegations both to South Korea and North Korea up until 2013. And her current work is focused on demilitarization of the U.S., peace building, denuclearization, and reunification of the Korean Peninsula. I now turn it over to you, Jae-yoon.
Hi, thank you. I am a member of a grassroots organization called the Notatol for Korean Community Development. We are based in New York, and we work for peace and demilitarization in our communities here in the US and abroad. We met Dr. Kee Park through his work in North Korea. Dr. Park is a lecturer on global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School and a director of North Korea program at the Korean American Medical Association. He has traveled over 20 times to North Korea to work alongside with North Korean doctors in hospitals in Pyongyang. He has published extensively about the humanitarian impact of sanctions on North Korea. He also participated in compilation of a recent report called Human Costs and Gendered Impact of Sanctions on North Korea, which was commissioned by Korea Peace Now, a global movement of women mobilizing to end the Korean War, and which is also listed in the resource section of the Sanctionskill website. He works extensively with other international humanitarian aid organizations and peace organizations to raise concerns and public awareness about the impact of sanctions on North Korea. Here's Dr. Kee Park.
Thanks, Jae-yoon, for that kind introduction, and Margaret. And let me also thank the organizing team for inviting me to this important panel discussion on the brutality of US-led sanctions. I should point out that I do not represent the government of DPRK on this issue. I am a US citizen of Korean heritage. I've worked alongside North Korean doctors since 2007. And I have seen firsthand the harmful impact of the sanctions have had on the ability of the North Korean doctors to care for their patients. And as an academic, I've studied and published extensively on how these sanctions are harming the most vulnerable population of North Korea, despite stating that they're not intended to harm ordinary people. So I would like to make 4 key points. First is sanctions kill. Our research has shown that as many as 4,000 North Korean people, mostly children under 5 years of age, may have died in 2018. And this is a result of the US-led sanctions and the maximum pressure policies. As this estimate was only looking at the UN agencies' programs and did not include the other NGOs that work inside North Korea, it is likely to be an underestimate. The actual number is probably much higher. The second point I'd like to make is that the sanctions hurt the DPRK doctors and hospitals' ability to care for their patients. And let me explain. The North Korean doctors are trying to do the best they can with increasingly scarce resources. So I'm a surgeon, and I operate inside North Korea, and I've performed surgeries with gauze and scalpel, which have been re-sterilized over and over again until they become unusable. The hospitals face insurmountable barriers for importing parts or repairing their medical equipment. I'll give you an example. During one of my recent visits, an X-ray machine we used to localize the spine during surgery was broken, and it was unable to be repaired because of the sanctions, make it impossible to acquire these parts. Let me walk you through this process of getting a part for these equipment. First, the North Korean doctors have to find a vendor willing to sell the part to a North Korean person. Good luck with that. Due to US Treasury actions and the sanctions, no major medical device company will do business with anyone from North Korea. But let's just say if they were able to find a broker, a middleman, who's willing to take the risk, then the North Koreans have to actually send hard currency, which is in short supply, to the seller. Good luck trying to find a bank that's willing to allow transfer of funds from North Korea into any bank outside of North Korea. Then let's say even if that's successful, then there was a purchase completed. They have to get this item through the Chinese customs at the border. Or the alternative is they have to smuggle it in. So these doctors simply do not have the means to navigate these impossible barriers, so the equipment remains unrepairable, and ultimately, the North Korean people, the patients who need medical care, suffer. My third point is that the sanctions actually have a disproportionate impact on the women of North Korea. And as Julian mentioned, I was part of a group of authors who put a report out on the gendered impact of sanctions in North Korea. And I'll give you one example. The current sanctions cap the import of refined petroleum by North Korea to 500,000 barrels per year. I think that the panelists from Iran and also Venezuela will know how little this amount is, 500,000 barrels per year. To put that in perspective, Australia, which actually is a petroleum producing country, they import about the same amount each day, and they have the same population. So this limit to petroleum puts a more enormous strain on the agricultural sector by incapacitating the mechanized farming implements. They all need fuel. The North Korean women, who are the main farm laborers, will bear the brunt of the increase in physical labor. And then fourth, I would like to make a point that the sanctions shackle the humanitarian aid organizations from delivering aid inside North Korea. On one hand, these organizations have simply packed up and left, rather than having to navigate the complex regulatory and financial barriers to operate effectively. Two organizations I'll name. One is Handicap International. You all know it's an organization devoted to improving the lives of the disabled and has done so much for the disabled people of North Korea. They left. The Finnish government-funded NGO, FIDA, which has been working on food security since 2001, also called it quits recently. On the other hand, the organizations that are actually remaining, they face tremendous challenges in one, raising the money for their programming and also to bring in funds for their operating and also shipping their supplies. To give you an idea, the UN agency's annual appeal to meet the most urgent humanitarian needs in North Korea last year was only partially funded. They had asked for $120 million, but received only 25%. And on top of these funding gaps, these organizations face having to apply for exemptions from the UN Security Council Sanctions Committee, finding a banking channel to process this transaction, and also finding ways to ship the cargo into North Korea. And I will tell you, these official UN agencies sometimes have to resort to shady channels to operate inside North Korea. So the question I was asked was, has the COVID-19 pandemic changed anything? Well, the US actually still insists that aid organizations ask for permission before sending COVID-19 response supplies. Now, to be fair, they have streamlined the process and are approving these requests in record time, sometimes in days. But simply the fact that humanitarian organizations have to ask for permission to deliver help in times of a global public health emergency is not only absurd, but it's immoral. And increasingly, these sanctions are being flouted post-COVID. 2 examples, both China and Russia have sent supplies, such as diagnostic kits and personal protective equipment, without going through the exemptions process at the UN Security Council. So how has DPRK responded? So some of you may know that they have a philosophy called Juche philosophy, which all has to do with self-sufficiency. And true to their philosophy, they're determined to be self-sufficient as much as possible. So I'll give you some examples. The North Koreans are now manufacturing their own medical equipment. For instance, ultrasound machines. They're designed, manufactured, and distributed for domestic use. They actually have things like artificial knee joints that are manufactured inside North Korea and implanted in people with knee problems. They're also building hospitals. You've seen in the news, Pyongyang General Hospital is a massive construction project, should be completed this year. They're also trying to open a fertilizer plant, as I think some of you have seen this month, and a medical oxygen plant. And this is no surprise because COVID-19, as you know, is a respiratory disease, and they need massive amounts of oxygen, and now they want to produce their own oxygen. So these are some of the ways the North Korean government is responding to the sanctions. So in closing, I will say that the sanctions have become a favorite tool for the U.S. in achieving its foreign policy objectives. Now, while these sanctions are not intended to harm ordinary people, it is clear that they do. So as an American, the question I have is, to what extent are we willing to put the lives of innocent women and children at risk in the name of national interest? And more broadly, and as a human being, how can we in this world better protect the most vulnerable and the marginalized from the actions of the most powerful country in the world? Thank you. I look forward to further discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Park, for that excellent presentation. Let's next move to our next country, which is Venezuela. And to introduce our next speaker is Kevin Zeese. Kevin Zeese has been a public interest lawyer since he graduated from George Washington University in 1980. His first areas of work were on ending the war on drugs and putting in place legal adult use and medical marijuana. He's currently the co-director of Popular Resistance, the co-host of Clearing the Fog radio show, and a co-founding member of the Embassy Protection Collective. So Kevin, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's viewing. We really appreciate you taking time out on a Sunday to participate in this event. It comes at a really important time, especially this discussion of Venezuela. Venezuela and Iran have broken through the U.S. sanctions, bringing in multiple ships of oil, despite the U.S. having a large armada in the Caribbean to prevent Venezuela from getting oil and other essential equipment. The U.S. sanctions in Venezuela have been long-lasting. The first was actually in George Bush's era, 2004, but they really escalated under President Obama when he declared Venezuela a national security threat to the United States, an absurd finding, but it led to increased sanctions. And of course, President Trump has added to that. I've been to Venezuela twice in the last few years. The second visit a year ago, the next speaker was very helpful to us, Carlos Ron. It was a peace delegation with the U.S. Peace Council. We met with activist groups, popular movements, individuals, and government officials. Carlos Ron is currently the Vice Minister for North America for the People's Power Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. He served as Charge d'Affaires of Venezuela's embassy in Washington, D.C. until May of 2018. In addition to having a long history with the government of Venezuela and the Bolivarian Republic's efforts at significant change from a capitalist toward a socialist system, Ron also has a deep understanding of the United States. because he lived here for many years. When we were in Venezuela, in the Venezuelan embassy, protecting it from a U.S. coup, there were incidents like coup mongers breaking into the embassy. We would talk with the embassy personnel, who would then seek guidance from Carlos Ron in how to deal with those kinds of situations. I should say that the federal charges against us for the defense at an embassy will be coming to a head, we hope, next week, and hopefully be resolved. The 4 remaining embassy defenders who are facing charges planning a webinar a week or so after that, one in English, and then we hope to do one also in Spanish. When we were in Venezuela with the U.S. Peace Council delegation, Carlos Ron was very helpful arranging meetings with government officials, including Foreign Minister Jorge Ariaza and with President Nicolas Maduro. Carlos has been very generous with his time, participating in the first webinar of this series on sanctions, as well as this current one. Thank you, Carlos, for your time. Please take it from here. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and it's a pleasure to be with you again for this webinar. And it's, again, I thank you. I can't thank you enough because of the importance that it is to hold these sessions and to allow people in the United States and throughout the world to know, how our countries are really affected by this outdated and criminal policy of coercive unilateral measures or sanctions, as they're erroneously referred to. I want to thank also all our the previous participants and for their comments and for coming together. I believe it is only when we come together to denounce these issues that we can really bring them up to the public and raise awareness of how much we need to do to combat this. Like we've spoken before, and I was listening just to Dr. Park's intervention, and when he was laying out the points of what how sanctions affect North Korea, it is exactly the same problems that we are facing in Venezuela. It's exactly the same limitations with regards to medical equipment, with regards to food. With the patterns are the same, and that's very important because this is a script that is used for all the other countries, and it's the same criminal logic where when you have to make a purchase of any sort, whether it be food, whether it be medicine, or whether it be spare parts for other types of technology that you need for their country's development, it's the same thing. Overpricing, difficulties finding somebody that's not afraid to provide whatever you need, and the problems of using the financial system, the banking system is non-existent basically for any of us. And we've spoken amply about how this has affected Venezuela in the case of food and in the case of medicine in particular. I often mention, for example, just to give a quick example, but last year, we had about 15,000 patients that need insulin, and then they get treated for dialysis, which weren't able to get their treatments on time because of this type of blockade, or vaccines that don't get carried out in the period that they need to because the obstruction. So these are problems that we all face. Now, I want to talk today in particular about something that you've brought up throughout the comments, which has been the recent tankers coming from Iran to Venezuela, bringing gasoline and bringing some of the components that are used in the refining process of gasoline. This is important because you may ask, or many people ask, why is Venezuela, that is an oil-producing country and that produces gasoline, why is it need to import? And then this, it goes back to the way the distribution of labor was set up for Venezuela and for the oil business throughout the world. And we specialize in a specific area, not necessarily we do everything in one same place. But but a lot has to do with the sanctions. A lot of this blockade and a lot of this shortage of gasoline that we've experienced in the last couple of weeks has a lot to do with the way the effect of the sanctions. First of all, Venezuela, as you know, owns Citgo, which is a oil corporation that is in the United States. And a lot of the refined final products would come from Citgo back to Venezuela. The main crude, the heavy crude to be processed was extracted from Venezuela, sent to the refineries in Citgo, and then the end process would come back, and that would be part of the gasoline and other byproducts that we use here. That has been completely cut off because of the sanctions, because the U.S. government decided that it would block Citgo's relationship to the Venezuelan government, but also because it handed it over to this group in the opposition that they're promoting as what they call the legitimate government, which is Juan Guaido, and many of you know already about this. So that is one issue. The other issue is that in our refineries, we have 6 refineries here in Venezuela. Our refineries are usually concentrated in the refining process, and for that, a lot of the components, the chemical components that were used for the refining here in Venezuela, were brought from outside. So part of the blockade that is coming down now was precisely blocking those components, and it's something that Elliot Abrams has said, in different statements throughout in the media and the public, that they knew gasoline, they knew the oil business is key for Venezuela, and they were going after it, and they were going to do whatever it took to block it and stop it. And and it's been going on, and this is something that ever since 2018, when Rex Tillerson was Secretary of State, this was something that was in their warnings. That if Venezuela doesn't change its positions, we're going to aim for the oil process and the whole oil business. At the end of the day, what had happened and why is this moment considered historic in the last couple of weeks, or the last week, or what took place, is that 2 countries under this criminal regime of sanctions decided to cooperate together. And normally, in any other context, nobody would even think about this, and there was nothing to say or to point out, because it was simply a transaction between a buyer and a seller. We're basically purchasing gasoline and some components from Iran. But the fact that this criminal imposition of measures throughout the world, this intimidation at all levels, the calls to different ports, and this is admitted by, and look at the Reuters reports, look at the AP and the AFP reports, there were calls made to different ports so that they wouldn't service the Iranian tankers because they were coming to Venezuela. Because they know that if, once those supplies came here, we would be able to restart our production and, have reach a normalization of gas distribution. You got to think about the effect that a gasoline shortage has on a population that is already facing has to face all these other shortages. That is now in the middle of pandemic, so you need gasoline to move food and all the other things that we need to get medical equipment and so forth, throughout the country during a time like this. So imagine all this concept, what it does to a country, and then again, it just brings out the reality that these measures are not aimed against a politician, they're not aimed against a government or a president, they're aimed at creating a situation of pain and suffering in the large Venezuelan population, so that the population of Venezuela can push forward an exit of President Maduro, will it be through a coup, through pressure for resignation, and all these types of undemocratic measures. So when the ships came over and they've been able to arrive to Venezuela, there was even hype in the media because of some statements given by those unnamed officials, how they always used to quote usually quote in the newspapers, unnamed officials from the Pentagon saying that they would, they're looking to see how they can stop the Iranian ships, or they're looking to see if they have to board the ships and stop. So what would happen again is the use of not only the sanctions as a mechanism, but also the military threat. And in Venezuela, we have suffered an increase of military threats by the United States within this sanction framework in the last, for years now, but specifically since March and April. Not only was there a threat against the ships, there was a threat against, by indicting President Maduro on narco-terrorism charges, something that's it doesn't even exist in United Nations language. There's narco-terrorism charges where there's a price put on his head, a $15 million reward. And then there's the launching of a supposed anti-narcotics campaign in the Caribbean, when we know that most of the drug trafficking towards the United States takes place in the Pacific coast of South America and not in the Caribbean coast. And then this threat, of moving ships towards, closer to the route where the Iranian tankers were going to come. A mission, that was aborted from a group of mercenaries, which the United States claims no direct participation, but just by saying that there was no direct participation, you can imply or infer that there's some indirect knowledge of this and some support. And then now recently, in the past week, there was an announcement of a security force assistant brigade that's going to Colombia. Some numbers are given, somewhere around 800 troops. They're going to come to Colombia, and they're going to be positioned at the borders with Venezuela. Again, by the way, this is illegal under Colombian constitution because this hasn't been approved by the Senate as it should be. All this as a part of what we say is a hybrid war against Venezuela, which is not only in the economic blockade and economic sanctions, but also with this huge military threat. However, the good news is that we have taken a decision, as did our brothers and sisters from Iran, that we are not going to let ourselves be bullied in this world, and that we have to take responsibility because we owe it to our peoples, and then we have to do whatever we can to strengthen our countries and strengthen our people during these trying times. So we were able to work out this deal. We were able to have these ships come into Venezuela, and we are able to now implement, starting tomorrow, June 1st, a new gasoline distribution throughout the country, a new scheme so that we can better make use of the resources. Again, all these hardships imposed because of the idea that with creating this maximum pressure, there will be an overthrow of the government. With this, I end, but I look forward to more conversations on this issue. And thank you again for inviting us and for giving us space to discuss this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for those remarks and describing what happened recently. Now we'll hear from the representative from Iran, and to introduce him is going to be Layla Zand. Layla was born and raised in Iran during a time when the country went through major changes and years of revolution, war, reconstruction, isolation, and reform. Layla emigrated to the United States in early 2000, and she's been engaged in building bridges of understanding between Iranians and Americans ever since. After doing 10 years of that work, in 2016, Layla enrolled in a PhD, interdisciplinary PhD program on public policy and social justice. She's currently working on her dissertation focused on the impact of citizen diplomacy in the context of Iran-U.S. relations. I'll now turn it over to you, Layla.
Thank you, Margaret. Hi, I'm very happy to be here with you all. And before I start, I want to raise George Floyd's name. as representing of all our brothers and sisters, our Black brothers and sisters, and also because his last words reminded me of what I hear from Iran. His last words is very similar to nations under sanctions. They cannot breathe. It's very difficult for them, and sanctions, as mentioned with previous speakers, it is an act of war. Sanctions killed, but the differences with sanction and war is sanction kills slowly and torturous. I'm honored to introduce Ambassador Syed Hosein Mousavian, who is a Middle East security and nuclear policy specialist at the Program on Science and Global Security at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. Between 1997 to 2005, Ambassador Mousavian served as head of the Foreign Relations Committee of Iran's National Security Council, spokesman for Iran in its nuclear negotiations with the international community, and foreign policy advisor to the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. And between years of 2005 and 2009, he served as Vice President of the Center for Strategic Research for International Affairs. Dr. Mousavian also is an author of several publications, including his book, a memoir of the Iran nuclear crisis, published in 2012. At the section of, before I ask him to join and share with us his thought about the sanctions, I want to just mention that at this section of the chats or Q&A, I will add Dr. Mousavian's Twitter address for those who are interested. Dr. Mousavian, thank you very much, and please share with us your thoughts. Merci.
Thank you very much, Leila. I also want to thank every organizer of a real, genuine right movement against sanctions. Iran has been sanctioned for 40 years. It is not something new. And I may say Iran is the most sanctioned nation and country in the world, because continuously for 40 years, the US has tried every possibility, capacity, effort to sanction and pressure Iran. And if we count the numbers of the US sanctions against every country, the number of sanctions against Iranian individuals or institutions or organizations are far beyond every other country. And therefore, I may be able to say Iran has paid the most price for sanctions. And I just want to give you one short example. During the 8 years war I was living in Iran, Saddam used chemical weapon against Iran. Based on the Congress report and CIA report, the US provided material and technology for Saddam to use chemical weapons. And about 100,000 Iranians, they were either killed and injured because of chemical weapons. This is the biggest victim of mass destruction weapons after the Second World War and after Japanese nuclear bombardment. That time, even Iranian medical centers, they really didn't have medicine to treat the victims. They were, because of the US sanctions. And Iranians, they were not able to send the victims, chemical victims, to other countries for treatment because of the US sanctions. Can you imagine a country has been bombarded by chemical weapons, 100,000 people, they have been killed or injured, material technology have been provided by the US, and the US has sanctioned the country not to be able to treat their victims and even not to be able to send the victims outside. This has been the story of Iran. I can tell you for hours and hours, give you many, many examples. However, the sanctions during President Trump is different. Although every other U.S. administration, whether Democrats and Republicans, they have tried to send their best to impose the most sanctions. Here, I should open a parenthesis to be fair. President Obama was the only president in his second term tried to have a policy of engagement with Iran, which the nuclear deal was the result of the engagement policy of President Obama. I just wanted to make sure the second term of President Obama was different from every other administration after Revolution 1979. However, during President Trump, the situation is completely different compared to the past decades. One, because we are confronting with the coronavirus, and internationally this is recognized, this is a threat to international health and even security. It is not a bilateral issue with the US. It is not even a regional issue. It is an international and global issue. Maybe Iranian government now has the most difficulties to import medicine and equipment, from masks to ventilators to treat the people challenged by coronavirus in Iran. Over 10,000 people up to now, they have been killed. About 150,000 people, they are infected in Iran, and Iranian government is doing hard because they cannot import medicine. All banking transactions are closed because of the US sanctions. No country can import humanitarian aids to Iran through banking system. Iran cannot buy, Iran cannot import. Therefore, the one big difference during President Trump and his maximum pressure policy is the situation Iran is facing with a global threat, which is coronavirus. The second issue is that this administration publicly has said that they are sanctioning Iran and the Iranian nation in order to put pressure on the people in order to create riots and instability and demonstration. They are punishing the Iranian nation and pushing the nation in order to rise to bring a regime change in the country. I mean, this is something they have publicly many times they have said. We support Iranian people, but they should decide. We impose all sanctions. They have their choice. They can demonstrate. They can create unrest. They can create instability in their country to bring regime change. The third difference is about the nuclear deal. The maximum pressure strategy of Trump, which all is about sanctions, started when Iran and the US in 2015, Iran and the world powers during in 2015, they agreed on a deal called Iranian Nuclear Deal, or JCPOA, to resolve Iranian nuclear crisis through diplomacy. The only Middle Eastern crisis during last decades have been resolved through diplomacy. The United Nations Security Council passed the resolution to support the deal. The International Atomic Energy Agency passed resolution to support the deal. Therefore, this is a deal Iran and the US, Iran and the world agreed, signed, and United Nations Security Council passed resolution. And the International Atomic Energy Agency also passed resolution. Iran delivered for 3 years full commitments under the nuclear deal with zero failure. And the US during President Trump withdrew from the deal, violated the United Nations Security Council resolution, violated all IAEA resolutions, and imposed unilateral sanctions. One. And the next difference is that for the first time during the history of United Nations, the US is punishing the other member of United States because of implementation of UN resolutions. Every country who is going to implement the United Nations Resolution 2231, which is about Iranian nuclear deal, which is about normal trade with Iran, which is about lifting the sanctions, would be punished by the United States. A member of permanent member of United Nations Security Council is punishing the other member of United Nations for implementing the United Nations resolution. This is something completely unprecedented during the history of international relations after United Nations has been created. And the other difference is that the US has decided to bring Iranian oil export to zero. Iran was exporting about 2.5 million barrels a day. Now it is about 100 or 200,000 barrels a day, while Iranians, even they cannot get the money back. I can say now it is almost zero, while the biggest part of Iranian income is from oil, which now is to zero. While the US has violated the United Nations Security Council, punishing every country who is going to make business with Iran in the framework of United Nations Security Council resolution. And while the US has imposed extraterritorial sanctions on every country and they have closed all banking relations, you can imagine what situation the Iranian nations now are facing with. The Iranian economy has shrunk 10% during last 2 years. The Iranian inflation in 2014, 2015 was about 9%, now is about 40%. And the Iranian currency during last 2-3 years has dropped about 500%. This is what President Trump has done. Nevertheless, I can say Iran managing the coronavirus has been more successful than the US. Despite of all sanctions and pressures. I'm living in New Jersey with 9 million people. The fatality numbers and the people die because of coronavirus in New Jersey is equal to number of the people died in Iran with 80 million populations. The US now has over 100,000, while the American population is 4 times Iran. The fatality number is about 10 times. Therefore, I can say the Iranian health system, they have been really sacrificing, and they could not achieve such a success without the Iranian nation support. The people, they are really united to defend their independence, integrity, and freedom from the US dominance. Nevertheless, at the end, I want to mention many people, including some friends at the panel, at this panel, they mentioned that the US is using the sanction instrument as a bullying in order to capitulate the other countries. It is true, but is it a weak point from a superpower or as an empire or a strength point? I would say the sanction strategy of the US shows the weakness of the US, because a real empire or superpower would be a superpower who can resolve the crisis internationally through diplomacy and peace. But unfortunately, the US has proven is going to create crisis by sanctions and wars. Look at Middle East. The US invaded Iraq. the US invaded Afghanistan. And our friend Mohammed from Yemen mentioned correctly, Saudi Arabia could never invade Yemen without the US support. US NATO invaded Libya. Look at the wars in the Middle East, not only the war 1980, Saddam invaded Iran, the US and Europeans and Arabs, they supported. The wars, even today, against Yemen, Libya, all the US is involved. The war strategy, the sanction strategy of the US is not only inhuman, illegitimate, illegal, but really this is disaster for international peace, security, and stability. I will stop here. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador, for those comments. We want to thank all of our presenters in this first round, our esteemed presenters, and remind our audience that this powerful information that we're hearing today is something that we don't hear in the United States dialogue. And that's why we want to bring this information to you so that people are aware of what the United States is doing and that in fact it is illegal. And with that knowledge, we also need to take action. And so now what I'd like to do is turn it over briefly to Sarah Flounders from the International Action Center and Joe Lombardo from the United National Anti-War Coalition. And they'll talk about some things that people can do. And then we'll come back for a second brief round of comments from our speakers. So Joe and Sarah, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Margaret. I think we've heard some incredible information, and I'm really looking forward to the question and answer period. I'm going to put up a little slide here, which will show people some of the things that can be done, even from your homes. If I can share this page, hang on for 1 minute. And there we go. The website of the Sanctionskill Coalition, which is a coalition of many groups, many of them are the groups that have been introducing people here today and were mentioned by Margaret Kimberly in the very, very beginning. You could find a lot of information here. There's a wonderful resource page, and you can see, read a lot about all the things you heard here today. But additionally, right on top of the homepage, you will find 3 links. You can see them right here. One is called Pledge, which is a pledge that organizations and individuals can sign to against the sanctions and to fight against sanctions. The second is that you can donate. Just putting on these webinars and the work we do and the material produced cost money, and it's important that people donate to help that process in the future. And finally, we've had a very successful open letter / petition that was organized by one of the Sanctionskill organizations, the U.S. Peace Council. When you put your name to this, it automatically sends a letter both to the White House and to the UN demanding an end of sanctions, especially during this period of COVID-19. And so I hope you will put your name to that and continue to send. We've already gotten thousands and thousands of these letters sent, and I think they're very effective, especially now that the United Nations is taking a position that sanctions should be lessened during this period of COVID-19, and the United States is taking the position that they should be increased. And even some of the US allies are balking at this particular time. So it's important that we put all the weight we can to stop these sanctions now and to perhaps make that divide even bigger. That will put more pressure on the United States. Finally, again, to donate, you can go to the link that is shown here, or you could simply text Sanctionskill to 646-859-5344, and you will be able to donate money that way to the Sanctionskill Coalition. I'm now going to just turn things over to Sarah Flounders, and she can say more about some things that you can do. Thank you.
thank you for all the panelists today and to the organizations that have worked together to put on this program. There's more than 1,000 people who registered through the Zoom, along with this being watchable on YouTube and on Facebook. But we are speaking at a time when the rage has boiled over in the US over the police killings, which are daily a real crime, a racist crime. And there is a rebellion underway against the racist police and against the very image of a racist cop's knee on a handcuffed African-American man, George Floyd, demanding Mr. Floyd get up while holding him down and cutting off his air. I can't breathe. Now, this is also what the sanctions are. This is the sanctions. This is blaming countries, demanding they stand up while holding them down and cutting off their air, their food, medicine, essential equipment. And so speaking out against it and giving absolute solidarity and support with those who are resisting and rebelling today in the US against these outrages, and resisting around the world, literally struggling to breathe. Every country, every voice that adds their name, their energy, their determination plays an important role. Our support and our solidarity here and around the world has never been more important. And what this panel represents, 3 weeks ago, the panel and a whole series of other panels that I'm going to mention, is a determination to speak to each other, to hear and give voice to countries around the world who have been silenced by the US corporate media. Even the challenge of having a speaker, Dr. Murshed from Yemen, speaking to us without Wi-Fi, with phone lines being cut through a Skype line, through another panelist. It shows how complicated it is, but how determined we are to give voice to these speakers, to send the transcripts of what they are saying out to everyone who's listening today, and everyone who registered will have the transcripts of each of the speakers, but especially Dr. Murshed, who spoke under such difficult conditions. So this is an important part of solidarity. It's breaking down the barriers. Now, the Sanctionskill campaign is a formation of a whole number of groups who have been engaged in a whole series of actions on their own. And on the website, we list resources and fact sheets and posters and chant sheets and coordinated actions. We have pledges to sign and letters. We're trying to get groups speaking out both against sanctions on particular countries and crimes here, and then raising it as a generalized policy of enforcing starvation and repression. So I want to just list, we had this program today will be on stream. It's downloadable. The program 3 weeks ago on May 9th is also available on stream, where there were speakers from Cuba, Iran, Zimbabwe, Nicaragua, and Syria. There are upcoming panels that are planned on Tuesday, June 2nd, a webinar where a number of countries, including Belarus, China, Cuba, Iran, Nicaragua, Russia, Syria, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe, the representatives to the United Nations will be speaking. And we urge you to tune in to that program. And that also will have the stream up for those who can't, don't have a chance to register or tune in. There is a program coming up on Tuesday, June 9th, that's organized by Code Pink and Femina and Sanctionskill, which is the gendered impact of sanctions. There are is a whole number of webinars that are taking place around the world. Today, from the 28th of May to June 1st, it's the 10th anniversary of the Mavi Marmara, the Israeli assassination and attack of those bringing aid and supplies to Gaza. This is hosted by the Freedom Flotilla, by South African Palestine Solidarity, to Scandinavia, to the US. So it's an international effort and many, many different webinars being organized. The links are on Sanctionskill. We list local events that activists locally are organizing. We've posted many, many information packets and interviews. Just to list a few more others that are very important. June 1st to the 5th, that's tomorrow to the 5th of June, the National Action to End the Korean War and the Korea Peace Advocacy Week is holding activities. Up to July 27th, where there's a Korea Peace Walk, which will be a virtual event this year, sponsored by the Korea Peace Now, and past Korea events. And also in wrapping up, on Monday, May 25th, there was a webinar on Africa Day, Africa Liberation Day, on COVID-19 sanctions and the human right to health, hosted by the December 12th movement with speakers from Zimbabwe, Namibia, and the African Union. There is a letter there to sign to lift the sanctions on Zimbabwe. There are a whole host of other activities, including from the International League of People's Struggle and the Resist U.S. War movement that has held webinars and Zoom links. I could go on. There's a number of Cuba webinars that have been held. Cuba, Africa, and the Caribbean, with quite a number of countries that are on. So by connecting to these voices and trying to get the word out as widely as we can, we want to be linking the whole world together, demanding and denouncing a criminal, cynical policy, and building real solidarity. And also, I think we always want to point out that the very sanctioned countries, as was pointed out by Dr. Murshed, are actually doing better than here in the US, where there is an absolute breakdown in both social mobilization, in agencies that can be of help, in the staff, and there is the highest rate of COVID fatalities in the world. So many of the sanctioned countries, by social mobilization, are able to make a huge difference. So this really is another example of where human solidarity can make a real difference, and we want to build that solidarity. So please link to the sites, link to each other. Let's continue this as an example of what's possible among every group. And I want to thank all those who have been participating so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Joe, for sharing that information with us. And remember, you can find that information at sanctionskill.org. The Sanctionskill campaign or coalition came together, as has been said, by a number of organizations in the United States that felt that it was really critical for us to raise awareness and organize on the illegality of the United States actions to countries around the world. We're also seeing solidarity happening between countries around the world, acting together to challenge the United States sanctions. What I'd like to do now is begin the second round of panelist presentations, and we'll begin with Dr. Medhat Abbas from Gaza. And if you could share with our viewers information that you have about any ways that Gaza or Palestinians are cooperating or acting in solidarity with other countries around the world to overcome the sanctions and blockade on Gaza, and what we can do in the United States, or people who are tuning in from other places around the world can do to act in solidarity with the people of Gaza. Dr. Abbas? If you could turn on your camera, there we go, great.
Yes, thank you so much, Margaret. Thanks for everybody sharing with us tonight, this event. In fact, what you can do to help Gaza is to raise our voice, to let everybody know in the United States and among the international community the real situation on the ground here, because what we see in the media is mainly fake. They are turning the victims to terrorists. I mean, we are not terrorists. We love peace. We want to live. We want to live on our land. We have nothing to harm anybody. We love the United States of America, as I mentioned before. But all what we want today is that they should consider that we have children, we have humanitarian situation, we have prevailing anemia among our children, more than 70%. We should have medicine to treat those children. We should have medicine to treat patients in our hospitals. We have no radiotherapy inside Gaza. We have no chemotherapy enough to treat cancer patients in Gaza. Heart surgery is suffering inside Gaza. Cardiac patients are dying. So we need to stop this siege, we stop this blockade, and at the same time, we want you to help us to show everybody, to let the people know in the reality of Gaza, the situation of having no electricity during a very hot summertime, the situation of having no salary for the staff, the public staff working with no hope to solve their social problems and economic problems, the people who cannot travel outside. Imagine that when you have your children outside Gaza and you cannot go to see them, or they cannot return back because of this blockade. This is disaster. And many people who were trying to receive treatment in Israel, they were detained at the border and they were interrogated and they were arrested at the end, kept in prison. I mean, that's not humanitarian, that's not accepted, that's very hard. And today, as I mentioned, we are still facing Corona with very, very minimal resources, which are not enough to enable us to make the social distancing, which are not enough to let us confront a very bad virus. If it gets inside Gaza, the situation will be very miserable. So we need your help to convey our message to everybody around you, to support Gaza and to uplift the siege and to end this political tragedy inside our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas. And now I'd like to turn, if we are able to, through Balmanazad's computer, to Dr. Saleh Murshed. We had some difficulty understanding the first time, perhaps, Dr. Saleh Murshed. If you speak a little more slowly, we'll be able to understand better, but we will work to get your comments out to everybody so that they can hear your full comments. But if you could talk similarly about any cooperation that's happening through governments or civil societies to end the war on Yemen, to get through the blockade, and what can we do to support that? So Dr. Saleh Murshed, go ahead, you have the floor.
Could you clarify the question, please?
Repeat the question?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, if you could
Could
talk
you repeat the question, please?
Yes. If you could talk about any international cooperation through governments or civil society that's helping to end the war on Yemen or break through the blockade, and what we can do to support efforts to end the blockade and the war.
Okay. Hello? Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay. Actually, this component is of great importance, just to clarify the injustice done by Saudi system to Yemenis, to innocent people, to poor people. So I want the outsider world to understand that we are at risk. We are at risk by Saudi system held and supported by USA logistic and intelligence information. So I want the whole world to understand that we are Yemenis, we are done injustice by this stupid system, and to denounce this operation, this aggression on Yemeni people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saleh Murshed.
Hello?
Yes, thank you very much. So now I'd like to turn to Dr. Kee B. Park. If you could also comment on any ways that people in the United States can support the efforts to end the sanctions and the threats against North Korea, the DPRK.
Yeah, so I think I can separate the thought process into two. One is the multilateral mechanism, the UN Security Council sanctions. Unfortunately, the way the system works is that when the P5 and the Security Council members agree on sending sanctions, their objectives are clearly listed and they approve it. But then when those objectives are met, the P5, you need only one country to oppose it, to roll it back. So for instance, China and Russia may feel that the sanctions on North Korea have been effective in halting their progression and building up of their nuclear weapons. So they may want the sanctions to be rolled back, but the US can singularly oppose the rollback of these sanctions. So some of the processes and the rules have to be changed. But really, the UN sanctions have never had that bite. There's no way to really enforce these UN sanctions. It's the US's unilateral sanctions that's the root of the problem. And how do you get at sort of taking out the bite from these US's ability to impose their coercive actions? I can't imagine that the number of countries that are actually being currently sanctioned, the number of countries that are opposed to these sanctions, can't come up with an alternative banking system. We allow US to dominate the banking channels, and we're at their mercy. So there has to be an alternative way to trade and transfer funds where we take away the bite from the US's ability to pressure these countries. So lastly, the important part is the civil society. I think it was Sarah and somebody else who gave the visual of the officer with the knee on the George Floyd's neck, and he said he can't breathe. And it's such a perfect description of the US's position and the way it's behaving on these countries. And this is an opportunity to increase the advocacy and raise awareness. And then we need to place leaders in the position of power that understand this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Park. And next, I would like to turn to Carlos Ron from Venezuela. And Carlos, what we saw recently with the cooperation between Iran and Venezuela to get supplies to Venezuela was a very successful action of refusal to be bullied by the United States. Are there other opportunities for cooperation? And perhaps you could comment on if there are, maybe through the non-aligned movement or through the United Nations, actions that are being taken to build this opposition to the US's illegal actions and hold the US accountable for what it's doing and how we can support.
Well, I think we're in a very different moment in history, in the sense that I think that countries now are willing to defy this sanction regime and scheme more than ever before. So I think that's very important to point that out. And then it's not only that the cooperation between Venezuela and Iran in this particular case. I mean, we've had a wonderful cooperation with Cuba for many years. Even before this was even before Venezuela was sanctioned, and as sanctions progressed, then we realized that how helpful and it had been. And in current times with COVID-19, has been the solidarity of not only with Cuba but also China, Russia, for example, that have helped Venezuela move through, and the importance, I agree with, again, with Dr. Park, of the multilateral aspect, because it has been through the institutions such as the World Health Organization that Venezuela has been able to acquire the test kits and other materials that have been needed here to combat the disease, and that would otherwise be almost impossible. So I think it is an important moment that we're living, because I think people are seeing that, in countries are seeing that enough with this type of imposition, and that we have to stand up and find new ways. I mean, there was letters circulated in the United Nations by many of our countries, the countries that we're speaking about today. Over 20 countries refusing and calling for an end of this type of policy. But also, again, like we always say, it is important for the United States, and especially for citizens of the United States, to also take this opportunity and show that, as a population, as an organized community, you're opposed to this type of policy. And that's something that you have to press on your elected officials on, and that's something that you have to demand in other ways. I believe it is through the, we have a moral, not only a moral responsibility, but we also have the moral arguments why this is a criminal policy. And I think it's the moment that you need to seize, so that you could pressure, and having these types of discussions are very good. Having this type of webinars, educational spaces are good, so that people understand that what's being discussed is a fight against a policy that is criminal, that has a criminal effect on large amounts of population, that its effect goes beyond any politics, because it affects everyone, left or right or whatever positions they have, and that is something that must come to an end. So I think is a combined work between countries, countries defying this system and this policy, and the people in the United States also pressuring inside.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And now I'd like to turn to the ambassador, Mousavian from Iran. And we understand that earlier this year, through an alternative system, I believe it's called Instex, the UK, Germany, and France were able to provide some supplies, not using the US dollar, getting around the sanctions to Iran. If you could speak, if you are able to speak to that, and other ways that Iran is getting around the sanctions or acting to defy the sanctions, and what we can do to support you.
Actually, Instex, it took about 2 years until Europeans, they create this mechanism. And now, after 2 years, which has been institutionalized, maybe about €1 million transaction, almost peanuts, zero. And Europeans, they really showed they are helpless and powerless to resist American unilateral sanctions. And European import of oil from Iran has reached to zero. And this Instex mechanism is practically the trade under this mechanism is almost zero. And I believe among all powers, only China has been the country which has tried to resist American pressure and sanctions, and they have, compared to other powers, whether Europe or Japan or India or other countries, I think China has been the only country relatively support the even Chinese business with Iran has dropped over 80%. But Europeans are almost zero, and Chinese are about 20-25% compared to the normal situation. And I believe the only way is to put pressure on the U.S. administration to stop imposing its political will on other countries, violating the international norms and regulations, violating the United Nations Security Council, and stop unilateralism. The only way is the public opinion here to put pressure, the nation here to rise against this criminal strategy of the US, and for the world powers to go for multilateralism, like a simple cooperation. Iran and Venezuela, they showed that even two countries, if they are united, they can resist and they can break the US pressure and sanctions.
Thank you, Ambassador. And again, we want to thank all of the panelists today for sharing their time with us, sharing their knowledge and their expertise. As we said at the beginning of this program, and Sarah said it so eloquently, you know, the United States, there's a direct correlation between the way that the United States is bullying and treating other countries and the way the United States is bullying and treating its own people. And it's through our own resistance that we're able to change this. It's exciting to see the rebellion taking place across the United States, and it's important that we make links between what is happening here and what the United States is doing abroad so that we can change that. The first step to that is education, because we don't get this information in the United States media. So we really urge you to share this video and the other videos that you have information about that we shared with you on the impacts of sanctions. You can find all of this information on the sanctionskill.org website. You can use these videos for discussion. You can show them. It's possible to have watch parties and do things like that virtually, to share them with others in your community so that you can have these conversations about what the United States is doing. And I know that representatives of the organizations involved in the Sanctionskill Coalition would be happy to work with you on setting those types of events up or speaking at any kinds of virtual events that you would like to organize. Please go to the sanctionskill.org website and sign up so that you can be made aware of upcoming events. Please sign the letter that was organized by the U.S. Peace Council, because that, as Sarah said, will send an email directly, or I think Joe said, will send an email directly to the White House and to the United Nations. It's important that thousands and thousands of us speak out on this. So please take action, share this knowledge with others, and let's continue to push for a world of cooperation, support for human rights, and protection of the planet. This is a moment when it's possible to do that, but it's only possible through us coming together and building this mass movement to make that change. So I want to thank all of you for participating today in this webinar on sanctioned countries denounce new U.S. military threats. Thank you to all.
Thank you all, and keep in touch. Thank you.